6 months after burying my husband, I watched my financial advisor's hands shake as he spread the bank statements across his mahogany desk. "Sarah, your son has stolen nearly $2 million from you and Robert over the past 8 years. I looked at those numbers and realized John hadn't just robbed us blind. He'd been counting on me dying of grief so he could finish the job. The only problem was I was very much alive and suddenly very, very angry. Where are you watching from today? Drop your location in the comments below and hit that like and subscribe button. Let me tell you how I got to this point. Sitting in David Chambers' office on a gray October morning, staring at evidence that my only child was nothing more than a well-dressed thief in a $1,000 suit. Robert had been gone for exactly 6 months and 12 days. Heart attack. Quick and clean, the doctor said, like that was supposed to comfort me. 45 years of marriage, and he left me sitting at the kitchen table with a half-finished crossword puzzle and a cup of coffee that went cold while I waited for the ambulance. The grief had been manageable, mostly because I'd been busy. Funeral arrangements, probate court, insurance claims, the endless paperwork that follows death like vultures. John had been wonderful during those first few weeks, attentive, helpful, taking care of all the financial details so I could focus on healing, or so I thought. "Mom, let me handle the accounts," he'd said, standing in Robert's home office with that concerned expression he'd perfected as a child when he wanted something. "You shouldn't have to deal with all this complexity right now." I'd been grateful. John was a financial consultant himself, successful by all appearances. He drove a BMW, lived in a house in Winnetka that probably cost more than I'd spent on cars in my entire lifetime. His wife Ashley wore designer clothes and took the twins to Europe for spring break. They seemed to have it all figured out, so I'd signed the papers, gave him power of attorney over the investment accounts while I sorted through 45 years of accumulated life. It seemed reasonable, responsible even. David Chambers had been Robert's financial advisor for 20 years, a careful, methodical man who wore the same style of wire-rimmed glasses Robert had favored and organized his desk like a military operation. He'd called that morning, his voice tight with something I couldn't identify. "Sarah, I need you to come in immediately. There's something we need to discuss about your accounts. Come alone. Don't mention this call to John." The drive to his office had been routine. Chicago traffic, October leaves falling like confetti. The familiar route through downtown that Robert and I had driven countless times for quarterly reviews. I'd expected discussions about asset allocation, maybe some concerns about market volatility. I hadn't expected to discover I was living with a criminal. "It started small," David was saying now, pointing to entries from 8 years ago. 5,000 here, 10,000 there, transfers he covered with explanations about investment opportunities or emergency expenses. But look at this pattern. The numbers swam before my eyes. Systematic withdrawals, forged signatures, accounts I'd never heard of. John had been methodical, patient, professional. He'd been embezzling from his own parents with the skill of a seasoned con artist. "The really clever part," David continued, his voice heavy with admiration and disgust, "is how he timed it. Major withdrawals always coincided with Robert's health episodes. When your husband had that surgery 2 years ago, John moved $400,000 into an account in the Cayman Islands. When Robert was in the hospital for pneumonia last Christmas, another $200,000 disappeared. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. He was hoping Robert would die first. That's my assessment. With Robert gone and you in grief, he could have cleaned out everything and claimed investment losses or medical expenses. You'd have never questioned it. But Robert hadn't cooperated with John's timeline. He'd recovered from every health scare, gotten stronger, stayed involved in our finances right up until that final heart attack in his kitchen chair. "How much is left?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. David consulted another spreadsheet. "Of your original $4 million in investments and savings, approximately $2.3 million remains. The house is yours free and clear, and Robert's life insurance policy of $800,000 hasn't been touched because John isn't the beneficiary on that account. So I had resources, not what I'd expected to have, but enough to live comfortably if I was careful. More importantly, I had options." "David," I said, gathering the papers into a neat stack, "I need you to do exactly what I tell you, and I need you to do it today." He leaned forward, attentive. "First, change all the passwords on every account. Remove John's access immediately. Second, move everything into new accounts at a different bank. Everything. Third, I want copies of all these records going back 10 years. And fourth," I paused, thinking about John's face when he'd hugged me at the funeral, how concerned he'd looked when I'd cried over Robert's suits. "Fourth, I want you to set up a meeting with the FBI's white-collar crime division. My son is about to learn that grief doesn't make you stupid." I drove home in a daze, David's manila envelope of evidence burning like a coal in my passenger seat. The house felt different when I walked in, like someone had rearranged rearranged the furniture in subtle ways. Every family photo on the mantel seemed like a lie now. Every memory of John as a caring son felt contaminated. The house was quiet, too quiet. For 6 months it had been my refuge, the place where Robert's presence still lingered in his reading chair and the crossword puzzles he'd never finished. Now it felt like a crime scene. I sat at the kitchen table where I'd eaten breakfast with Robert for 25 years and opened my laptop. Time to do some detective work of my own. John's social media presence was carefully curated, like everything else about him. Photos of family vacations that must have cost $30,000. Ashley's jewelry collection that could fund a small country. The twins' private school tuition at $40,000 per year each. For a financial consultant with a modest practice, John was living remarkably well. I started making a list. The house in Winnetka, purchased 3 years ago for $1.2 million. Ashley's Mercedes, the boat they kept at Belmont Harbor, the country club membership, the designer clothes, the European vacations. Even with a generous estimate of John's legitimate income, the math didn't work. My phone rang. John's name on the screen made my stomach clench. "Hi, Mom, just checking on you. How was your day?" His voice was warm, concerned, the same tone he'd used when I'd called him crying after Robert's funeral. For 8 years, this man had been stealing from his own father while looking him in the eye over Sunday dinners. "Oh, fine," I managed. "Just running errands. The usual widow things. Are you eating enough? You sounded tired last week." The caring son routine would have fooled me yesterday. Today, I heard something else underneath it. Calculation. He was monitoring me, making sure I wasn't asking the right questions or talking to the right people. "I'm managing. Actually, John, I was thinking about the investment. Maybe it's time I started paying more attention to what we have." Silence. Just for a beat, but I caught it. "Mom, you don't need to worry about that stuff. That's why you have me handling it. You should focus on taking care of yourself. But I'd like to understand. Maybe we could go over the accounts next week?" "Of course. Absolutely. Let me pull everything together and we'll sit down soon. Maybe next month when things slow down at work." Next month. Always next month. How many times had he deflected with promises to explain things later? "Actually, I'd prefer to do it this week. I called David Chambers today." Another pause. Longer this time. "You called David? Why would you do that without telling me?" There it was, the edge in his voice that he couldn't quite hide. Not concern, panic. "He's been our advisor for 20 years, John. I don't need your permission to call him." "Of course not. I just meant we should coordinate these things." "What did you discuss?" I could picture him in his office, probably pacing, trying to figure out how much David might have revealed. The predator realizing his prey was no longer helpless. "Oh, just general questions about Robert's accounts. Nothing specific." Relief flooded his voice. Good. "Well, let me know if you have any questions. David's great, but sometimes these older advisors can be a bit overwhelming with detail. I prefer to keep things simple for you." Simple. Like I was an elderly child who couldn't handle grown-up conversations about my own money. After we hung up, I sat in Robert's chair and thought about the man I'd raised. The little boy who'd cried when he accidentally stepped on an ant. The teenager who'd worked summers to save money for college. The young man who'd called every week during his first job in California. When had he changed? When had he looked at his aging parents and seen opportunity instead of responsibility? My phone buzzed with a text message from Ashley, my daughter-in-law. "Sarah, John mentioned you called David today. Just wanted to make sure you're not worrying unnecessarily about money. We're here to help with anything you need." They were coordinating now, circling the wagons. I wondered how much Ashley knew about the source of their comfortable lifestyle. Was she complicit, or was she another victim of John's deception? I typed back, "Thank you, dear. Just trying to understand Robert's affairs. You know how it is." Her response came immediately. "Of course. It's smart to stay informed. Let us know if we can help explain anything." Help explain how they'd been robbing me for 8 years? I didn't think that conversation would go well. The house phone rang. Margaret Walsh, my neighbor and closest friend since Robert and I had moved to this street. "Sarah, are you all right? I saw you come home and you looked upset." Margaret was 72, sharp as a tack, and had raised 4 children who actually loved her. She'd also buried 2 husbands and survived a son who'd tried to put her in a nursing home against her will. If anyone would understand what I was dealing with, it was Margaret. "Can you come over? I need to talk to someone I trust. Give me 5 minutes." When Margaret arrived with a bottle of wine and that no-nonsense expression she wore when life got complicated, I spread David's evidence across the dining room table and told her everything. She read through the documents in silence, occasionally making small sounds of disgust or amazement. When she finished, she looked at me with eyes that had seen their share of family betrayal. "That calculating little bastard," she said finally. "How long are you going to let him think he's getting away with it?" Margaret and I spent the next 3 hours developing what she called Operation Full Disclosure. The wine helped with our planning, though I suspect it also made our revenge fantasies more elaborate than strictly necessary. "First rule of warfare," Margaret said, refilling our glasses. "Know your enemy's weaknesses. What does John care about most?" I thought about my son, trying to see him clearly for the first time in years. His reputation, his image, the respect of his colleagues and clients. And Ashley? Social status, being seen as the perfect wife and mother, the country club, the charity boards, the right schools for the kids. Margaret made notes on a legal pad, like a general planning a campaign. So, if their lifestyle suddenly disappeared, if their friends learned the truth about how they'd been funding their perfect life, it would destroy them. Good. Now, what about evidence? You need everything documented before you make your move. I told her about my upcoming meeting with the FBI, about the bank transfers I'd already made to secure what was left of our money. Margaret nodded approvingly. Smart, but that's just defense. What about offense? We made a list. John's employer would need to know about his criminal activities. The country club where Ashley served on the board would be interested to learn their membership fees had been paid with stolen money. The private school where the twins attended would want to know about their tuition source. I want to see his face when his world collapses, I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. Oh, honey, Margaret said, patting my hand. By the time we're done, he's going to wish he'd just asked you for a loan. The next morning, I drove to the FBI field office downtown. Special Agent Rebecca Morrison was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of focused intensity that made me think she enjoyed putting white-collar criminals behind bars. Mrs. Mitchell, thank you for bringing this to our attention. Financial elder abuse cases are a priority for us, especially when they involve this level of systematic fraud. She reviewed David's documentation with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen every variation of family financial crime. The good news is, your son was thorough, almost too thorough. He left an excellent paper trail, bank records, forged documents, patterns of behavior that clearly indicate intent to defraud. What happens next? We'll need to interview you formally, gather all the financial records, probably execute search warrants on his home and office. Are you prepared for this to become public? Federal charges mean media attention, court proceedings, family upheaval. I thought about Robert, how he'd always said that the right thing to do was rarely the easy thing to do. Agent Morrison, my son stole $2 million from his own parents. He did it systematically, patiently, over 8 years. He forged documents and lied to our faces while planning to steal everything we'd worked for. If that's not worth a little media attention, what is? She smiled, the first time she'd shown any warmth since I'd arrived. We'll be in touch within a week to begin formal proceedings. In the meantime, don't change your behavior around John. Act normal. Let him think he's still in control. Acting normal turned out to be harder than I'd anticipated. John called that evening to check on me, and I found myself analyzing every word, every inflection. Was he calling because he cared about my well-being? Or was he monitoring my activities? Mom, I've been thinking about what you said, about wanting to understand the finances better. Maybe we should start with something simple, like reviewing your monthly expenses. Monthly expenses, not the investment accounts where he'd been stealing, not the long-term planning documents, just my grocery money and utility bill. That sounds perfect, I said, injecting enthusiasm into my voice. I've always been curious about the bigger picture too, the investments, the retirement planning, all of it. Well, let's start small and work our way up to the more complex stuff. There it was again. The assumption that I couldn't handle complexity. After 45 years of marriage to a man who'd built a successful construction business, after raising a son and managing a household and working part-time at the library for 15 years, John still saw me as helpless. Of course, whatever you think is best. Great. How about Sunday dinner this week? Ashley's making that pot roast you like. Sunday dinner, where we'd sit around their dining room table, bought with money stolen from Robert and me, while Ashley served a meal funded by our stolen savings, and I'd smile and ask about the twins' school activities paid for with our stolen money. I'll bring dessert. After hanging up, I called Margaret. How long do you think I can keep this up without losing my mind? Not much longer, but that's okay. Once the FBI moves, it'll be out of your hands. Just hold on a little while longer. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about family photos, about all the times John had hugged me and told me he loved me while actively robbing us, about Ashley's thank you cards for birthday gift written on stationery bought with stolen money. But mostly, I thought about Robert, about how he'd trusted John with everything, about how he died believing his son was a good man who'd take care of his mother. Robert had been wrong about John, but he'd been right about me. I was stronger than anyone gave me credit for, strong enough to survive his death, strong enough to discover the truth about our son, and definitely strong enough to make sure John paid for every dollar he'd stolen. The next morning, I woke up with a plan that would have made Robert proud. Sunday dinner at John and Ashley's house was a masterclass in performance art. I sat at their polished dining room table, eating pot roast that probably cost what I used to spend on groceries for a week, and pretended not to calculate the price tag on everything in sight. The house was a testament to stolen money. Crystal chandelier in the foyer, probably $15,000. Ashley's diamond earrings, another 10. The wine John poured with casual extravagance was a bottle I'd seen at the liquor store for $300. Grandma Sarah, look what I learned in dance class. Emma, my 15-year-old granddaughter, jumped up to demonstrate a complex routine that was clearly the product of expensive private lessons. That's beautiful, sweetheart. I meant it. Whatever John had done, the twins were innocent. Emma and Tyler were good kids who had no idea their college funds were built on theft. Ashley beamed with maternal pride. Emma's teacher says she has real potential. She's been invited to audition for the Chicago Youth Ballet's Summer Intensive program. How wonderful. That must be quite competitive. Oh, it is. And expensive. Ashley laughed in that way wealthy women do when discussing costs that would bankrupt most families. But it's such an opportunity. The program fee alone is $18,000, plus housing and living expenses in New York. $18,000. Enough to buy a reliable used car, paid for with money stolen from Robert's retirement account. I'm sure she'll do wonderfully, I said, cutting another bite of pot roast. John raised his wine glass to family, to supporting each other through everything. The irony was so thick I nearly choked, but I raised my own glass and smiled like the doting mother-in-law they expected me to be. After dinner, John and I retired to his home office to discuss my financial education. The room was decorated like a Hollywood version of success. Leather-bound books, expensive desks, framed diplomas and awards. Everything designed to project competence and trustworthiness. John pulled out a folder of papers. I thought we'd start with your basic monthly budget, just so you understand where your money goes. The papers he showed me were legitimate. Utility bills, property taxes, grocery expenses, all the small, manageable pieces of my financial life that totaled maybe $3,000 a month. As you can see, your expenses are very reasonable. Robert did a good job setting you up for a comfortable retirement. I nodded appreciatively. It's reassuring to see it laid out like this. But what about the bigger picture? The investments, the savings accounts? John's expression shifted slightly. Still warm, but more guarded. Those are much more complex, Mom. Market fluctuations, asset allocation, risk management. It's really better if I handle those details and just keep you informed of the highlights. But I'd like to understand. Maybe you could show me the account statements. Of course. Let me gather everything together and we'll go through it properly. Maybe next month when I have more time to explain everything thoroughly. Next month again. Always next month. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, I could just log in online and look at them myself. David gave me the new passwords when I was in his office. The color drained from John's face. New passwords? Oops, I'd said too much. But sometimes mistakes can be strategic. Oh yes, he said it was routine security maintenance. Something about updating all the access codes annually. Didn't he contact you about it? John's hand tightened around his wine glass. No, he didn't mention that when I spoke with him last week. Interesting. John had been calling David, probably trying to monitor my activities and control the information I receive. Well, I'm sure it's nothing important. These technology updates are so routine nowadays. But John wasn't buying my casual tone. Mom, what exactly did you discuss with David? I want to make sure you're getting consistent information. Time to push a little harder. Oh, just general questions about our account. I was curious about some of the transactions I saw, large withdrawals over the past few years that I didn't remember discussing with Robert. John went very still. What kind of withdrawals? Well, there were several for investment opportunities, I think. Tens of thousands at a time. I just wondered what we'd invested in, whether they were performing well. Those were diversification moves, John said quickly. Dad asked me to help move money into higher yield account, more sophisticated investments than the basic savings products you were using. How wonderful. Are they doing well? Very well. Excellent returns. Could I see the statements for those accounts? They're complex institutional products, Mom. The statements are difficult to interpret without professional training. I smiled sweetly. I'm sure I could manage with a little help. After all, it's my money. John's phone rang, saving him from having to answer. He glanced at the screen and frowned. I should take this. Business call. He stepped into the hallway, closing the door behind him, but his voice carried through the thin wall, and I caught fragments of the conversation. She's asking questions. David changed the passwords. No, I can't access anything now. We need to be careful. When he returned, his demeanor had shifted from son to financial advisor. Professional distance replacing family warmth. Mom, I've been thinking about your questions, and I'm concerned you might be getting overwhelmed by financial details during an already stressful time. Have you considered grief counseling? Sometimes when we're processing loss, we can become fixated on controlling things that are actually being handled properly. There it was. The gaslighting gambit suggests that my perfectly reasonable questions about my own money were symptoms of mental instability. That's an interesting point, I said thoughtfully. Though I should mention, David seemed very pleased that I was taking an active interest in our affairs. He said it showed real mental clarity and strength. John's smile became strained. Of course, I just don't want you to stress unnecessarily. Oh, I'm not stressed at all. Actually, I'm feeling more energized than I have in months. It's wonderful to feel engaged with life again. As I drove home that evening, my phone rang. Margaret's name on the screen. How did it go? I may have overplayed my hand a little. He knows something's wrong. Good. Let him sweat. Guilty people always give themselves themselves away when they're nervous. When I got home, there was a message on my answering machine. Ashley's voice, carefully casual. "Hi, Sarah. I just wanted to follow up on our conversation about the ballet program. I realized I might have gotten the cost wrong. It's actually not as expensive as I said. John sometimes exaggerates these things. Anyway, call me back if you have questions." Too late, Ashley. I'd already done the math. Agent Morrison called Tuesday morning with news that made my coffee taste like victory. "Mrs. Mitchell, we've completed our preliminary investigation. We're ready to execute search warrants on your son's home and office tomorrow at 6 a.m. We'll also be freezing his personal accounts and placing holds on any assets purchased within the past 5 years. How long before arrest? If the evidence supports charges, and I believe it will, we'll move within the week. Are you prepared for this to become public very quickly?" I thought about Robert, about how he'd always said that sunshine was the best disinfectant for corruption. "Agent Morrison, I've spent 6 months mourning my husband and 6 days mourning the son I thought I had. I'm ready for justice. One more thing. We'll need you to maintain normal contact with John until we move. If he suspects we're involved, he might try to destroy evidence or flee." After hanging up, I sat in Robert's chair and allowed myself a moment of pure anticipation. In less than 24 hours, John's carefully constructed world would collapse. The house, the cars, the country club membership, the private school tuition, all of it built on stolen money would be exposed. My phone rang, John's name on the screen. "Hi, Mom. I've been thinking about our conversation Sunday night, about your questions regarding the investments." "Oh? I realize I may have been overprotective. You have every right to understand your financial situation completely. Why don't you come by the office today? We'll go through everything together. Too little, too late." But I played along. "That would be wonderful, John. What time works for you? How about 2 o'clock? That'll give me time to pull all the records together." When I arrived at John's office that afternoon, I was struck by how expensive everything looked. Premium location in downtown Chicago, corner office with a lake view, furniture that probably cost more than some people's annual salaries. For a financial advisor with a modest client base, John had impressive overhead. The receptionist, a young woman who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion magazine, greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Mitchell, John's told us so much about you. I'm so sorry for your loss." John emerged from his office wearing the kind of suit Robert would have called funeral expensive. His smile was warm, but I noticed the tension around his eyes. "Mom, thanks for coming down. I have everything ready for our review." His office was a shrine to success. Awards from financial industry organizations, photos with clients at exclusive events, diplomas from prestigious universities, everything designed to project competence and prosperity. "I brought copies of all the account statements going back 10 years, John said, gesturing to a thick stack of papers on his desk. "I thought we'd start with the overview and then drill down into specifics if you have questions." The papers were real. I could see that immediately. But as I scanned the summaries, something became clear. These were accounts I'd never heard of, with balances that didn't match anything David had shown me. "John, these accounts," I pointed to several investment funds listed on the summary sheet. "I don't remember opening these. Dad handled most of the investment decisions. He was very forward-thinking about diversification strategies." I kept reading, my confusion growing. According to these statements, I had nearly $4 million in various investment accounts. David had shown me evidence that most of our money was gone. Then I understood. John had prepared fake statements, elaborate, professional-looking documents designed to convince me that our money was still safely invested when he knew it had been stolen. "These look very comprehensive," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Could we call David and have him walk us through how these connect to his records? I'd hate for there to be any inconsistencies." John's hand froze over the paper. "Actually, that's not necessary. These are consolidated reports that include all the accounts David manages, plus the additional investments I've made on your behalf. Additional investments, higher yield opportunities, international markets, private equity, sophisticated instruments that David's firm doesn't handle." I nodded thoughtfully. "How exciting. Could I see the statements for those accounts directly? I'd love to understand what we're invested in." "Those are institutional level products, Mom. The reporting is very technical." We were back to the too complex for Mom routine. But this time, I had evidence of his lies sitting right in front of me. "John," I said gently, "I need to ask you something important." He leaned forward, projecting concerned attention. "These investment accounts you've shown me, the balances, the performance numbers, are they real?" Something flickered behind his eyes. Fear, maybe, or calculation. "Of course they're real. Why would you ask that?" "Because David showed me our actual account balances last week, and they don't match what you're showing me today." John's face went through several expressions in rapid succession. Surprise, confusion, anger, then back to concerned bewilderment. "Mom, David is a good advisor, but he only manages part of our portfolio. portfolio. He wouldn't have visibility into the full picture. Then call him, right now. Let's get this sorted out. John glanced at his watch. He's probably not available this late in the day. Let me schedule a three-way meeting for tomorrow. Actually, I said, pulling out my phone, let me try him now. Before John could object, I was dialing David's direct number. Sarah. David's voice was cautious when he answered. How are you? I'm fine, David. I'm sitting here with John, reviewing some investment statements. Could you help us reconcile a few numbers? Of course. What specific accounts are you looking at? I read off the account numbers from John's fake statements. The silence that followed was telling. Sarah, David said carefully, I don't show any accounts with those numbers in our system. Where did these statements come from? John reached for my phone. Let me talk to him. There's obviously some confusion about account numbering system, but I held on to the phone. David, John says these are additional investments he's made on our behalf, accounts you wouldn't manage directly. Sarah, based on what we discussed last week, I think you and I should meet privately tomorrow morning. There are some things we need to clarify. I ended the call and looked at John, who had gone very pale. Mom, I can explain everything. I hope so, John, because right now it looks like you've been showing me fake statements while stealing my money for 8 years. For a moment, his mask slipped completely. I saw the real John, cornered, desperate, calculating his options. Then the concerned son expression snapped back into place. That's a serious accusation, Mom. I think your grief might be affecting your judgment, but it was too late. I'd seen the truth in his eyes. Tomorrow morning, I said, gathering my purse. We're all going to sit down with David and the FBI and sort this out properly. John's face went white. The FBI? Oh yes. Didn't I mention? They're very interested in cases involving financial elder abuse, especially when family members systematically steal from their parents over multiple years. I stood up to leave, then turned back with what I hoped was a grandmother's smile. By the way, John, you might want to call Ashley. Tell her she should probably resign from the country club board before tomorrow's news cycle. Something about stolen money funding their membership fees. These charity organizations can be so particular about their reputation. As I walked out of his office, I heard him frantically dialing his phone. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. to the sound of my phone buzzing. Agent Morrison's voice was crisp and professional. Mrs. Mitchell, we're moving in 30 minutes. Are you somewhere safe? I'm at home. Good. Stay there until we contact you. And Mrs. Mitchell, you might want to turn on the local news around 8 o'clock. I made coffee with hands that were surprisingly steady and settled into Robert's chair to wait. At exactly 6 a.m., I heard sirens in the distance, faint but getting closer. They weren't coming to my neighborhood, but I knew where they were going. By 6:15, my phone was ringing constantly. Margaret called first. Sarah, I just saw FBI vehicles racing toward Winnetka on the news. Please tell me that's what I think it is. That would be Operation Full Disclosure entering its final phase. Hot damn! I'm coming over with pastries. We're going to watch this unfold properly. The next call was from Ashley, her voice high with panic. Sarah, there are federal agents at our house. They have search warrants. They're going through everything. John's office, our computers, bank records. What is happening? I took a sip of coffee before answering. I imagine they're investigating financial crimes, dear. You should probably call a lawyer. Financial crimes? What financial crime? John hasn't done anything wrong. Ashley, sweetheart, your husband has been systematically stealing from Robert and me for 8 years. The FBI has evidence of nearly $2 million in theft. You might want to start thinking about how you're going to explain your lifestyle to a federal prosecutor. The silence stretched so long, I thought she'd hung up. That's impossible, she whispered finally. John would never. John did, and now he's going to pay for it. The line went dead. Margaret arrived with Danish pastries and a thermos of coffee just as the morning news began their lead story. We watched from my living room as helicopters circled over John's neighborhood, showing FBI agents carrying boxes from his house and office. Financial advisor John Mitchell was arrested this morning on charges of elder financial abuse and wire fraud, the news anchor announced. Federal prosecutors allege Mitchell systematically stole nearly $2 million from his elderly parents over an 8-year period. The screen showed John in handcuffs being led to a federal vehicle. His expression was a mixture of rage and disbelief, as if he couldn't quite understand how his carefully constructed world had collapsed overnight. The alleged victim is Mitchell's 67-year-old mother, Sarah Mitchell, whose husband died 6 months ago after a lengthy illness. Sources close to the investigation say Mrs. Mitchell discovered the theft herself and contacted authorities. Margaret squeezed my hand. Look at you making the news. Robert would be so proud. The coverage continued with interviews from John's neighbors, his colleagues, parents from the twins' private school. The overwhelming theme was shock and disbelief. John had been so respected, so successful, so trustworthy. My phone rang again. This time it was Emma, my granddaughter, calling from school. Grandma Sarah? Her voice was small and confused. There are reporters at our school. Kids are saying Daddy was arrested. Is it true? My heart broke for her. Whatever John had done, Emma Emma and Tyler were innocent victims. Yes, sweetheart, it's true. Your father made some very serious mistakes with money that belonged to your grandfather and me. Are we going to be okay? The question every child asks when their world suddenly becomes uncertain. You and Tyler are going to be fine, I said firmly. This is between the grown-ups. You're still loved, still safe, still going to be taken care of. Can I come see you after school? Of course, I'll pick you up myself. After hanging up, I realized I'd just made a commitment that would require me to face the media circus surrounding my family. But Emma needed stability, and right now, I was the only source of that she had. The afternoon pickup at the twins' school was surreal. Reporters shouted questions as I walked to the entrance, cameras following my every step. The school had posted security guards, but nothing could stop the chaos of a federal crime story involving wealthy families and stolen millions. Emma ran to me the moment she saw me, her face streaked with tears. Grandma, everyone's staring at us. The teachers are being weird. Some kids said we're going to be homeless. I hugged her tightly, feeling her thin shoulders shake with sobs she'd been holding in all day. Where's Tyler? He got in a fight with Jake Morrison. Jake said Daddy was a criminal and Tyler punched him. He's in the principal's office. I found Tyler sitting in a chair that was too big for him, his lips split and his eyes defiant. Principal Henderson looked relieved to see me. Mrs. Mitchell, I'm so sorry about all of this. Tyler was defending his family's honor, which is admirable, but we can't have students fighting. Of course not. Tyler, are you hurt? He shook his head, but I could see the confusion and fear behind his bravado. At 13, he was old enough to understand that his life had just changed dramatically, but too young to process what it meant. Can we go home now? He asked quietly. We're going to my house, I said. Your mother is dealing with some complicated adult problems right now. As we drove away from the school, Emma asked the question I'd been dreading. Grandma, what's going to happen to Daddy? I looked at her in the rearview mirror. This beautiful girl who looked so much like John had at her age, and tried to find words that were honest but not cruel. Your father broke the law, sweetheart. He's going to have to face the consequences of that. It probably means he'll have to go to prison for a while. For how long? I don't know. That will be up to the judge. Tyler spoke up from the passenger seat. Good. He deserves it. Tyler. No, Grandma. He does. I heard him and Mom fighting about money all the time. I heard him on the phone talking about accounts and transfers and how he was handling everything. I didn't understand it then, but I do now. Out of the mouths of babes. Tyler had been witnessing his father's criminal activity without realizing what he was seeing. When we got to my house, I called Ashley to let her know where the children were. She didn't answer. I left a message saying the twins would be staying with me until she was ready to talk to them. That evening, as Emma and Tyler did homework at my dining room table, the same table where Robert and I had planned our retirement, where John had eaten Sunday dinners while stealing from us, I felt something I hadn't expected. Peace. For 6 months, I'd been drifting through my days, going through the motions of living while feeling like a ghost in my own life. Today, for the first time since Robert's death, I felt fully alive, engaged, purposeful. I'd protected my grandchildren. I'd exposed a criminal. I'd taken back control of my own life. Robert would have been proud. The next morning brought a knock at my door that I wasn't expecting. Ashley stood on my porch looking like she hadn't slept in days. Her perfectly styled hair was disheveled, her makeup smudged, her designer clothes wrinkled. I want to see my children. Of course, come in. She followed me to the kitchen, where Emma and Tyler were eating pancakes and arguing about whose turn it was to control the television remote. Normal sibling behavior in the middle of an abnormal situation. Mom! Emma jumped up and hugged Ashley, who immediately started crying. Tyler was more cautious. Are you okay? Ashley sat down at the table and pulled both children close. I'm sorry about yesterday. I'm sorry about all of this. I had no idea what your father was doing. I studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Ashley had benefited from John's theft as much as anyone. The house, the cars, the vacations, the private schools. She'd enjoyed it all without asking questions about where the money came from. But looking at her now, holding her children while her world collapsed around her, I believed her. Ashley was many things. Materialistic, status conscious, sometimes shallow, but she wasn't a criminal. What happens now? Tyler asked. Ashley looked at me helplessly. I don't know, baby. The FBI froze all our accounts yesterday. The house is going to be seized because they say it was bought with stolen money. I can't even access our checking account to buy groceries. Where are you going to live? I'm working on it. Maybe my sister in Phoenix temporarily. Emma's eyes filled with tears. We have to move to Arizona? It might be temporary, Ashley said, but her voice lacked conviction. I made a decision that surprised even me. You could stay here, temporarily, until you figure out what comes next. Ashley stared at me. Sarah, I couldn't. After everything, the children need stability. They need to finish the school year with their friends, and frankly, you need help navigating what comes next. Why would you help us? John stole from you. We benefited from that theft. It was a fair question. Why was I offering to help the family that had been living off my stolen money? Because punishing children for their father's crimes isn't justice. justice, it's just more damage. And because I paused, thinking about Robert, about the kind of man he'd been. Because this is what good people do. They help children, even when the adults in those children's lives have failed them. Ashley started crying again, but this time it was relief mixed with the grief. There would be conditions, I continued. Complete honesty about everything you knew or suspected about John's activities, full cooperation with the FBI investigation, and acknowledgement that the lifestyle you were living was funded by theft from Robert and me. Ashley nodded through her tears. I swear to you, Sarah, I had no idea. I asked John sometimes about how we could afford things, but he always said business was good, that he'd made smart investments. I wanted to believe him. And the country club, the private school tuition, the European vacations? I thought we were just successful. I thought John was good at what he did. She looked at me with eyes full of shame. I didn't want to look too closely because I liked our life. I liked being able to say yes when the kids wanted things. It was more honesty than I'd expected from Ashley. Admitting complicity through willful ignorance took courage. All right then, you and the children can stay in the guest rooms upstairs. But Ashley, if I find out you knew more than you're telling me, you're out. And if you ever lie to me again about anything, you're out. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you so much. Emma and Tyler looked relieved for the first time since their father's arrest. They'd have stability, familiar schools, and most importantly, they'd have each other. That afternoon, Agent Morrison called with an update on John's case. He's being held without bail, flight risk, and the serious nature of the charges. His attorney is trying to negotiate a plea deal, but we're not interested unless he provides full restitution and information about any other victim. Other victims? We've discovered evidence that your son may have been running similar schemes with other elderly clients. We're investigating at least 3 additional cases involving clients of his firm. I sat down heavily. John hadn't just stolen from his parents. He'd been systematically targeting vulnerable elderly clients, using his position as their financial advisor to rob them. Mrs. Mitchell, I need to ask you something. Are you prepared for a long legal process? This case is going to trial unless John pleads guilty. And even then, there will be months of court proceedings, restitution hearings, victim impact statements. It's going to be emotionally draining. I thought about Robert, about how he'd always said that the right thing to do was worth doing even when it was hard. Agent Morrison, my son didn't just steal money from us. He stole our peace of mind, our trust, our sense of security. He made us victims in our own home. If pursuing this case helps prevent him from doing the same thing to other families, then yes, I'm prepared for whatever it takes. Good, because we're going to need your help building the strongest possible case. That evening, after Ashley and the children had gone to bed, I sat in Robert's chair and opened a bottle of wine Margaret had brought over. For the first time in months, I wasn't drinking alone or drinking to numb pain. I was celebrating. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, legal proceedings, media attention, the complicated process of rebuilding relationships with my grandchildren while their father sat in federal prison. But tonight, I was proud of the woman I'd become, strong enough to expose my own son's crime, compassionate enough to help his innocent family, wise enough to know that justice and revenge weren't the same thing. I raised my glass to Robert's photograph on the mantel. We did good, honey. We raised a thief, but we also taught him to face consequences, and we taught me to be stronger than I ever knew I could be. The house felt peaceful, full of sleeping children who would wake up safe and loved, despite everything their world had lost. For the first time in 6 months, that felt like enough. 3 weeks later, John's attorney requested a meeting with me. Patrick Sullivan was exactly what I'd expected. Expensive suit, confident demeanor, the kind of lawyer who specialized in making wealthy criminals' problems disappear. We met at David Chambers' office, neutral territory where I felt safe and supported. Sullivan spread legal documents across the conference table like he was dealing cards. Mrs. Mitchell, my client would like to discuss a resolution that could benefit everyone involved. Your client is my son, Mr. Sullivan, and your client is a thief. What could he possibly offer me that I don't already have? Sullivan's smile was practiced and empty. Full restitution, Mrs. Mitchell. Every penny John took, returned with interest. In exchange for your cooperation in negotiating a reduced sentence. I looked at the numbers he'd written on a legal pad. $2.3 million. More money than John should have had access to, given that most of our stolen funds were supposedly gone. Where exactly would this restitution come from? John made several successful investments with the funds in question. Despite the irregularity of his access to those funds, the investments performed well. Translation: John had been gambling with our money and won. It didn't make the theft any less criminal, but it meant the money still existed. Mr. Sullivan, are you telling me that my son stole our retirement savings to play the stock market? I'm telling you that full restitution is possible if we can reach an agreement. David Chambers leaned forward. What kind of agreement? A victim impact statement that emphasizes John's cooperation, his remorse, and the unique circumstances of family relationship. Something that might influence the judge toward a more lenient lenient sentence. I stared at Sullivan for a long moment, then started laughing. Not polite chuckling, but genuine, incredulous laughter that made both men look uncomfortable. Mr. Sullivan, your client systematically stole from his dying father and grieving mother for 8 years. He forged documents, lied to federal agents, and according to the FBI, he did the same thing to at least 3 other elderly clients. And you want me to ask a judge to go easy on him because we're family? Mrs. Mitchell, John made mistakes, but prison time won't benefit anyone. If he's incarcerated, he can't work to repay other victims. His children will grow up without a father. His wife will struggle as a single mother. His children and wife can visit me anytime they want to see what it looks like to rebuild your life after someone you trust steals everything from you. Sullivan tried a different approach. What would your husband have wanted? Would Robert have wanted to see his son in federal prison? It was the wrong question to ask. My husband would have wanted to see justice done. Robert built his construction company from nothing by treating people fairly and keeping his word. He would be disgusted to know that his son became exactly the kind of person he spent his life fighting against. I stood up, gathering my purse. Mr. Sullivan, you can tell your client that he'll get the victim impact statement he deserves. I'll tell the judge exactly how his crimes affected our family, exactly how much damage he caused, and exactly why he deserves the maximum sentence allowable under law. Sullivan's composure cracked slightly. Mrs. Mitchell, that's a decision you may regret. Family relationships can be repaired, but federal convictions are permanent. So is being a victim of your own child's greed. Good day, gentlemen. As I walked to my car, my phone was already ringing. Ashley's name on the screen. Sarah, John's lawyer just called me. He said you refused to help with a plea deal. That's correct. But Sarah, if John goes to prison for the maximum sentence, it could be 15 years. The children will be adults before he gets out. I got in my car and sat for a moment before answering. Ashley, what exactly do you think I should do? Lie to a federal judge about the impact of John's crimes? Pretend that being robbed by your own child is somehow less devastating because we share DNA? I just thought maybe for the children's sake. For the children's sake, their father should have thought about consequences before he decided to become a career criminal. I'm not going to teach Emma and Tyler that family loyalty means covering up crimes. That evening, I found Tyler doing homework at the kitchen table while Emma practiced violin in the living room. Normal sounds of family life, but with an undercurrent of tension that hadn't been there before. Tyler, can we talk? He looked up from his math homework with Robert's eyes and John's stubborn jaw. Is this about Dad's lawyer calling? Smart kid. Too smart for his own good sometime. How do you feel about your father possibly going to prison for a long time? Tyler was quiet for a moment, chewing on his pencil eraser the way John used to do when he was thinking. I'm angry at him, he said finally, but I'm also scared about what happens to us. What scares you most? That people will always think we're criminals too, that we'll never be able to have a normal life because of what he did. I sat down next to him at the table. Tyler, what your father did was wrong, but it doesn't define you or Emma or even your mother. You get to decide who you become. But what if people always remember? What if they always look at us and think about the money he stole? Then you prove them wrong. You live with integrity. You treat people fairly. You work hard and earn what you have. I paused, thinking about Robert. You become the kind of man your grandfather would have been proud of. Tyler nodded slowly. Grandpa Robert was a good man. Yes, he was, and he loved you very much. He'd want you to learn from your father's mistake, not repeat them. Are you going to help with the plea deal? No, Tyler, I'm going to tell the truth about what your father did, but that doesn't mean I'm going to abandon you and Emma and your mother. You're my family too. Relief flooded his young face. So, we can still live here? As long as you need to. That night, I called Agent Morrison to discuss the victim impact statement. I want to make sure I understand exactly what John did, not just to Robert and me, but to his other victims. Are you sure you want those details? Some of it is pretty disturbing, I'm sure. What Morrison told me over the next hour made my stomach turn. John hadn't just stolen from elderly clients. He'd targeted the most vulnerable ones. Widows like me who were grieving and overwhelmed. An 80-year-old man with early dementia who'd trusted John to manage his care facility expenses. A retired teacher who'd given John access to her accounts after her husband died in a car accident. In each case, John had used their emotional vulnerability and trust to systematically drain their savings. The total theft across all victims was nearly $8 million. The really sickening part, Morrison continued, is how he selected victims. He specifically sought out clients who had recently lost spouses, who were isolated, who didn't have other family members involved in their finances. He was a predator. That's exactly what he was. And Mrs. Mitchell, I need you to know something else. The other victims are looking to you for leadership. What you do, how you handle this case, it's going to influence whether they have the courage to testify at trial. I thought about the retired teacher, about the man with dementia, about all the elderly people who'd trusted their financial security to my son and lost everything. Agent Morrison, I'll do whatever is necessary to make sure John faces full consequences for what he did, and I'll do whatever I can to help his other victims get justice, even if it means your son spends the next 15 years in federal prison." I looked at the family photos lining my hallway. Pictures of John as a baby, a boy, a young man, the son I'd raised, loved, sacrificed for, the son who'd grown up to prey on vulnerable elderly people for profit, especially then. The trial began on a cold Monday morning in February, exactly 8 months after Robert's death. I wore the navy blue dress I'd bought for his funeral, not because I was mourning, but because it was the most dignified outfit I owned, and dignity mattered when facing your son across a federal courtroom. John looked smaller than I remembered, sitting at the defendant's table in a gray suit that didn't quite fit. Prison had changed him, thinner, paler, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who'd finally realized there were consequences he couldn't charm his way out of. He looked at me once as I entered the courtroom, and I saw something I'd never seen in his eyes before. Genuine remorse. Not the calculated regret of someone who was sorry they got caught, but actual understanding of the pain he'd caused. It didn't change anything, but it was something. Prosecutor Janet Collins was a woman about my age who specialized in financial crimes against the elderly. During our preparation meetings, she'd told me she'd chosen this specialty after watching her own mother lose her life savings to a financial advisor who targeted widows in her retirement community. "This case matters beyond just your family," she'd said. "We need to send a message that financial elder abuse carries serious consequences, that families can't shield criminals just because they share DNA." The prosecution's case was methodical and devastating. Bank records, forged documents, recorded phone calls where John discussed his investment strategies for his parents' money. Expert witnesses who explained exactly how the money had been moved, hidden, and spent. Ashley testified on the second day, looking fragile and nervous in a simple black dress. She'd lost weight over the past month, and without her usual designer clothes and professional styling, she looked younger and more vulnerable. "Did you know your husband was stealing from his parents?" Collins asked. "No, I did not." "Did you ever question how your family could afford your lifestyle on your husband's stated income?" Ashley's voice was barely audible. "I should have. I wanted to believe we were just successful. I didn't want to look too closely because I was afraid of what I might find." "What did you think when you learned the truth?" Ashley looked at me across the courtroom, tears streaming down her face. "I was horrified and ashamed. These are people who loved us, who trusted us, people who would have helped us if we'd been in financial trouble, and we were living off money stolen from them." John's attorney tried to paint Ashley as a co-conspirator who'd encouraged John's spending, but it didn't stick. Ashley might have been willfully ignorant, but she genuinely hadn't known the money was stolen. On the third day, it was my turn to testify. Collins walked me through the timeline of discovery, the fake investment statements John had shown me, the elaborate deception he'd maintained even after Robert's death. But the moment that silenced the courtroom came when she asked about the emotional impact of the theft. "Mrs. Mitchell, beyond the financial loss, how did discovering your son's crimes affect you?" I looked at John, sitting 20 feet away, finally ready to tell him exactly what his choices had cost our family. For 45 years, my husband Robert worked 16-hour days building a construction business so we could have security in our old age. He never took expensive vacations, never bought fancy cars, never spent money on himself that could have gone to our retirement savings. He died believing his son would take care of me. My voice stayed steady, but John's composure cracked. He put his head in his hands. When I discovered what John had done, it wasn't just about losing money. It was about losing faith in everything I thought I knew about my family. It was about realizing that for 8 years, every hug, every "I love you," every concerned phone call was part of an elaborate performance designed to keep me from discovering I was being robbed. I paused, looking directly at John. But the worst part was realizing that John had been counting on my grief to finish stealing everything Robert and I had worked for. He'd been waiting for me to die or become incapacitated so he could take the rest. John was crying now, quietly but openly. For the first time since his arrest, he looked like the little boy I'd raised instead of the calculating criminal he'd become. "Do you have anything you'd like to say to your son, Mrs. Mitchell?" I considered my words carefully. This was my last chance to say what needed to be said, in a forum where John would have to listen. "I want him to understand that love without honor is worthless. That family loyalty doesn't mean protecting people from the consequences of their action, and that the children he's worried about not seeing while he's in prison are the same children he was willing to rob blind through his theft from their grandparents." Collins nodded. No further questions. John's attorney's cross-examination was brief and ineffective. He tried to suggest that I was being vindictive, that I was letting anger override family loyalty, but every question he asked just gave me another opportunity to detail the systematic nature of John's crimes and their impact on our family. The defense case was weak. Character witnesses who testified that John was a good neighbor, a devoted father, a respected member pillar of the community, but none of them could explain away the evidence of 8 years of calculated theft. John himself never testified. His attorney advised against it, probably because John would have had to explain how someone accidentally steals $2 million from their own parents. On Friday afternoon, both sides gave their closing arguments. The prosecution focused on the premeditated nature of the crimes, the vulnerability of the victims, and the need for deterrence. The defense pleaded for mercy, for consideration of John's family, for recognition that prison time wouldn't benefit anyone. It took the jury exactly 4 hours to find John guilty on all counts. Sentencing day arrived on a spring morning that felt more like hope than I'd expected. Judge Patricia Williams was a stern woman in her 60s who'd spent her career handling white-collar crime cases. During the trial, she'd shown no patience for excuses or manipulation tactics. The courtroom was fuller than I'd expected. Other victims of John's schemes, journalists, and a surprising number of elderly people who'd come to witness what they saw as a test case for financial elder abuse prosecution. Margaret sat beside me, solid and supportive as always. Ashley sat in the back with Emma and Tyler, who'd asked to be present for their father's sentencing. I'd worried it would be too traumatic for them, but Ashley insisted they needed to see that actions had consequences. John's attorney made one final plea for leniency, emphasizing his client's remorse, his cooperation with authorities, and his role as a father and husband. It was a polished performance, but it felt hollow in the face of what we'd learned during the trial. Then, Judge Williams asked if John wanted to make a statement before sentencing. John stood slowly, looking older than his 51 years. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but clear. "Your Honor, I have no excuse for what I did. Not financial pressure, not family obligations, not business problems. I stole from my parents because I wanted to maintain a lifestyle I hadn't earned, and because I thought I could get away with it." He turned to look at me, and I saw Robert's eyes in his face. "Mom, I know sorry isn't enough. I know I can't undo what I did or give back the trust I broke. I stole your security, your peace of mind, and your faith in your own family. I made you a victim in your own home." His voice cracked, but he continued. "The worst part is that Dad died believing I was taking care of you. He died trusting me to honor everything he'd worked for. Instead, I was planning to steal all of it." John looked at Ashley and the children. "I want Emma and Tyler to understand that going to prison isn't a punishment being done to me. It's a consequence I earned through my own choices, and I want them to know that their grandmother is not responsible for my situation. She did exactly what any honest person would do when they discovered they were being robbed." He faced Judge Williams again. "Your Honor, I don't deserve mercy, and I'm not asking for it. I'm asking that my case serve as a warning to anyone who thinks they can prey on elderly people without facing serious consequences." Judge Williams reviewed her notes for several minutes before speaking. "Mr. Mitchell, in 23 years on this bench, I've seen many cases of financial elder abuse. What distinguishes your case is not just the amount stolen, but the systematic, predatory nature of your crimes and the particular cruelty of victimizing your own parent." She paused, her expression stern. "You didn't steal to feed your family or pay for medical bills. You stole to fund a lifestyle of luxury while your father worked himself to death building the very savings you were plundering. You stole to buy country club memberships and European vacations while planning to leave your mother destitute." I felt a cold satisfaction hearing my pain articulated so clearly by someone with the authority to impose consequences. "However, I note your cooperation with authorities, your apparent genuine remorse, and the fact that full restitution will be made to all victims." My heart sank. She was going to be lenient. "Therefore, I sentence you to 12 years in federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation. You will make full restitution to all victims plus interest and penalties. And Mr. Mitchell," John looked up, "I hope you spend every day of those 12 years thinking about the elderly people who trusted you with their life savings and the parents who loved you enough to hold you accountable for your crime." 12 years. John would be 63 when he got out. Emma would be 27. Tyler, 25. They'd be adults with their own lives, their own families perhaps. As court officers led John away, he looked at me one more time. I saw genuine sorrow in his eyes, and something else, gratitude. He was grateful that I'd been strong enough to stop him, brave enough to expose him, loving enough to not let him destroy more lives. I nodded once. It was the closest thing to forgiveness I could offer. Outside the courthouse, Agent Morrison found me signing autographs for elderly supporters who wanted to thank me for taking a stand. "How do you feel?" she asked. I thought about Robert, about the 8 months since his death, about the woman I'd become through this process. "I feel free," I said finally. "For the first time since Robert died, I feel like I'm living my own life instead of being a victim of someone else's choices." That evening, Ashley and the children sat with me in my living room, eating pizza and trying to process what the next 12 years would look like. "Will you visit him?" Emma asked. "Maybe," Ashley said. "When you're older, you can decide for yourself. Tyler, now 14 and taller than his mother, spoke with surprising maturity. I want to see him once, to tell him I understand why Grandma Sarah did what she did, and to tell him I'm going to be better than he was. Emma nodded. Me too. I looked at these children who'd lost their father to his own greed, but were determined not to let his choices define their futures. Robert would have been proud of them. That night, I called Margaret to share a bottle of wine and reflect on everything that had changed. Any regrets? She asked. I thought about John in his federal prison cell, about Ashley struggling to rebuild her life as a single mother, about Emma and Tyler growing up with their father's crimes as part of their family history. No, I said finally. Justice was done. The other victims got their money back, and maybe somewhere an elderly person won't become a victim because a potential predator heard about this case and realized the consequences were too severe to risk. I raised my wine glass toward Robert's photograph. We did good, honey. We raised a son who became a criminal, but we also taught him to face the consequences of his choices. And we taught me that being a victim is temporary, but being strong is permanent. The house felt peaceful, full of sleeping children who would wake up knowing that actions have consequences, that family love includes accountability, and that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is refuse to enable the people you love most. 3 months later, I received a letter from John in federal prison. It was simple and honest. Mom, I know I have no right to ask for anything, but I want you to know that what you did saved me from becoming an even worse person than I already was. I was planning to steal everything. If you hadn't stopped me, I would have destroyed more families, hurt more people. Thank you for loving me enough to hold me accountable. I hope someday Emma and Tyler will understand that having a grandmother with integrity is worth more than having a father without consequences. I love you, John. I read the letter once, then put it in my jewelry box next to the watch Robert wore for 45 years of honest work. Some gifts are worth keeping, even when they come from people who've hurt you. I'm 67 years old, living in my own house, raising my grandchildren with the help of their mother, and sleeping peacefully for the first time in years. Justice, I've learned, feels a lot like freedom. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.